When it comes to confession, for guys struggling particularly with porn addiction and things, all of us don't like to confess, right? So you've got someone in your life you know you've hurt, you don't want to confess to them what's going on. Well, I made a video about rats and how keeping those lies and secrets can kind of create a colony of rats that ruin your life, ruin your relationship, and so on. But I wanted to share a little bit differently about the impact this can have related specifically to porn addiction and porn recovery. So you screw up, you mess up, you do something you know you shouldn't do, and you have to confess now to your wife or to your spouse, whoever that might be. Initially, in the early stages, often what happens is guys will mess up and they don't feel safe. They don't want to tell their wife right away, so they go a couple weeks. They want to prove that they've been good before they go to their wife. This happens when it comes to confessing to God too, right? We turn our back on him because we feel like we've let him down, we've shamed him, we're not worthy, so we want to pay some kind of penance, prove that we're worthy. The problem is this doesn't actually help us. God doesn't like this because he wants us to come to him. He already knows about it anyway. He wants us to come and shorten the distance between infraction or sin and confession. So we start off, maybe it's 2 weeks, maybe it's 6 months, where we just reject God, turn our back on him or whatever. And slowly we bring that closer. 3 months, 2 months, a week, 2 days before we confess. And you can apply it in the context of your relationship of accountability or marriage relationship as well. But see, the more close that becomes, the more you begin to recognize grace, partnership, love for one another, and receive the love from God specifically. But what's the most beautiful part of this thing is eventually what happens is this. Your line moves behind the point of sin. The point of doing something that you shouldn't do or don't want to do or have decided not to do. Now what happens is you begin to call for help before when you begin to sense that it's a problem. When you're tempted, when something's going wrong, when you're having a rough day, you either call your spouse and say, hey, I'm having a hard time, or you learn to pray to God before. So there's the passage that talks about not having more than you can handle. We've really messed that passage up. It's very specific, and it's in relation to temptation. No temptation will overcome you, but that is common to man. God will not let you be tempted beyond what you can handle because he'll allow you a way out. In other words, you will, if you don't take his way out, it'll be more than you can handle. This is what that passage describes and discusses. Now, if you're going to ignore that way out, you're in trouble, right? But there is always a way out. We begin to practice that. We see the way out before we fall. And we call for help. We take the route. But if you're messing around with temptation and ignoring that way out over and over and over and over, thinking it's all about you because you got to do it in your own strength, which is never anything that the Bible ever suggests. You've got support. You've got accountability. You've got maybe counselors. And hopefully you have this perfect, beautiful support through and with your spouse. And as that line becomes closer and closer, you're no longer confessing. You're asking for help. You're taking the way out, and you're journeying that route together with God and with your spouse. May that be an encouragement to you, that line, the closer and closer you bring it to the point of sin, of falling into temptation, the less and less you fall because you bring it farther and farther behind that point of falling. It's a beautiful thing, and it's incredibly encouraging when it starts to happen and when you realize that you're not falling anymore, but instead you're calling for help and finding the way out. Anything this applies to. Porn recovery, porn addiction, absolutely, but also anything else that you struggle with, especially as it relates to your relationship with Jesus. May you find more and more of Jesus every day in the midst of your struggles, temptations, and hurdles.